And you could hear noises coming down from Apache Summit. Used to be an organization called Ferguson Steer. And they were big trucks in that time with tankers on them, and they hauled liquid petroleum, they hauled gasoline, they hauled anything that would go boom. And they would come from El Paso and go through to Artesia, because now we know that's where the refinery was. Didn't know that at that time. But those trucks would come down there, and they would do a thing they called Mexican overdrive. Don't get hysterical. Everybody called it that. And that was when you reached the summit, you popped her out of gear, and you ran the canyon. And it, was most interesting. Sometimes you'd hear them slamming trailers together. Sometimes you would hear a boom. That happened twice in my memory. But by the time they got to our place, it was Jake Brake City, trying to slow those things down because there were people and somebody might cross the road. It wasn't a real big problem, but it could happen. And besides, there were log trucks coming out of and going into the sawmill. But you could hear those Jake Brakes squalling. It's kind of fun. When there was a major wreck, you always knew about it because you heard it.
Go slow. If you're in there in the fall, you're going to see some absolutely beautiful colors. When Highway 70 intersects Highway 380, it's time to turn there at Hondo and go up the Lincoln Valley. Let's imagine that it's not paved. Let's imagine that you're traveling on horseback. Go slow in your whatever vehicle you're in. Travel slow. Imagine yourself back in the 1800s, late 1800s maybe, riding along. Maybe your goal is to get to Lincoln.
The law was late coming to west of the Pecos when it comes to, I mean, there wasn't anything real serious, They just, they had two huge men in those days. I remember one of them was named Bones, and I can't remember the other one's name. They were MPs. They were just stayed up here. They sent them up here on the weekends. They were both about 6'4" and 240, and they enforced the law rather rapidly. If somebody got out of line, they just hit him upside the head, and that usually took care of it. Pop Ivy, that I had mentioned earlier, he had a habit of, if they'd get a phone call and say, well, they're having a big fight down at the Hollywood Inn, which was in Hollywood, which was another separate community at that time. And Pop would have Frank take him down there, and he'd get out, and big man, 6'4", 260, something like that. And he'd take his handcuffs, one end of his handcuffs in one hand, and there'd be this big fight going on out there, and he'd just start marching through it, swinging the handcuffs back and forth like that. And when he get through, he'd look back, see if he had anybody still standing or wanting to fight. And usually that everybody was pretty much decided that discretion was the better part of valor at that point. But if they'd all got through fighting, then he'd take the taxi and go back up, and they didn't want him back down there again.
Parks Pine Place and up across the road from what is Whispering Pine. In fact, some of those cottages are now, have been purchased by and owned by the Whispering Pine people. And it was Nell Parks, Dave Parks' mother, had those. And Mrs. Park taught school at Stetson. The house on the left in this photograph is probably where Dave and his mother lived in the office. And that's Parks Pine Place, and that is Dave Parks, who is incidentally one of the few people around who was born here.
Let's continue this adventure. Let's go on west out of Lincoln about 12 miles and come to a community called Capitan. Capitan's been there a very long time. Cows would go across the mountains south I'm sorry, north of the ranch, go straight north out of the ranch to drive cattle over there to Capitan, to a little town adjacent called Colera. Colera had a railhead. They'd drive their cattle over there, load the cattle on the train for shipment to market. They would take their fruits and vegetables over there too, to load on the train. Kind of interesting to me because I've been over to Capitan and talked to people about Colera, and it's a little bit of a surprise. You may have to do a little search to find somebody who knows where Colera was. The only way to find out who it was is where it was is if someone can tell you to go out north and west of Capitan, you'll see some piles of coal. There was some coal mining there too.
If you remember one that I think is just an excellent photograph, and it has an ox cart. And that was in 1940. It was the New Mexico Quatricentennial, 1540 to 1940 Coronado days. And that is a very authentic cart. And then, of course, as the years have gone by, there have been other parades and many. But I think that just has a tremendous flavor.
Imagine yourself again. This time, you're in a wagon, driving horses, pulling your wagon, trying to get from Capitan to Ruidoso. Count the bridges. Think about the old days when there were no bridges, all the low water crossings. Had you started counting low water crossings from the time you left the Billy the Kid's area in Ruidoso Downs, you go across a lot of low water crossings. We are happy today to have bridges everywhere. Makes it a lot easier to travel. Let's go then on up north. There's a small community. By the way, you're going to see on both sides of the road, you're going to see where ranches are. Not much farming through there, but ranches and homes, people who do ranching. And you'll come to an area where there's a big bridge. And before you go across that big bridge, if you do turn to the right, you'll go to Bonito Lake, a source of water for many of the communities around. And then the community of Angus, right there, just as you go across the bridge, you'll come to the community of Angus. Beautiful little town, has a church, wonderful church, and every summer there are lots of encampments there, people coming to the church for the purposes of all kinds of conferences and that sort of thing.